Advancing to the knockout stage at the World Cup with a 2-0 win over Australia in Seattle. The Americans did get off to a fast start in the 11th minute. It ended up being an own goal, but that still counts. The U.S. doubled its lead in the 43rd minute with Alex Freeman heading home the rebound on a block shot. It was initially ruled offsides. VAR ended up overturning that call. Americans now await the result of tonight's game between Paraguay and Turkey. If Paraguay wins or draws, the U.S. will win its group, Group D. Let's welcome in Adam Hunt to talk about what we saw this afternoon from the United States men's team. Adam, initial takeaways from what was a very feisty match, if you will.
Yes, certainly. You can say that again, Amanda. Feisty, particularly in the second half towards the end of the game. Let's compare it to what we saw in the first game for the US against Paraguay. Not quite as free-flowing, but still so much good work. And I think the fans, it was a wonderful atmosphere in Seattle, will have really enjoyed what they saw, both inside the stadium and those watching on TV as well. That first half was brilliant. They got off to a good start. Obviously, there was the own goal. You had Alex Freeman getting his goal too, only his third international goal. And I think what we saw from the US was contributions from some of the other players that maybe didn't shine quite as much in the first game against Paraguay. Obviously, the big news prior to kickoff was the fact that Christian Pulisic wasn't even going to be on the bench. He wasn't involved at all, not even as a substitute. So it's Ricardo Pepi who got the nod in place of him, and I thought he looked lively and proved himself to be more than a capable replacement for Pulisic. But as you mentioned, the second half, the game became very stop-start, almost aggressive, I think is probably a good way to describe it. There were some heavy challenges from the Aussies coming in, and that was something that the US had to deal with. And I think Mauricio Pochettino will be very happy that there were no more injuries picked up to any of his key players from the game, and they can move on to the final group game against Turkey with just that injury issue for Christian Pulisic, and with a 2-0 victory. I thought it was a very good afternoon.
Yeah, we saw multiple yellow cards being handed out at once toward the very end of the game. So talk to us. Look, you mentioned Ricardo Pepi coming in place of Christian Pulisic, and they go ahead and get the win. What is your concern, though, moving forward? If he's not able to go in the next game, what do you know about the injury and why he wasn't able to play today and potentially moving forward?
Well, I wasn't actually that surprised. I think some people were, but I wasn't too surprised that he wasn't involved today, because the injury that he's got is something that has to be managed. And we've seen him training over the last few days. Up until yesterday, he had some kind of black strapping on his leg. And he was training alone away from the group. And normally when you see a player doing that, that means that they're not that close to being able to return. So I wasn't too surprised that he wasn't involved. And I'm not sure if he'll play a role in the third game, because now that the US have qualified themselves, obviously we'll have to wait and see what happens in the game later. But they could be, as you said, confirmed as the group winners without even needing to play that final game against Turkey. And I think there's two things for Pochettino to think about going into that game. Flo Balogun did get a yellow card for some rough and tumble with the Australian defender towards the end of the game. And that means that he's sitting on a yellow card. So if he gets another one, he could then potentially have to miss a game into the knockout stages. Whereas if he doesn't play, the yellow cards reset. So I wonder if we'll see Balogun playing, or how much of a role he'll play in that final game against Turkey. And also whether Pochettino will risk Pulisic in that game, or whether he'll think, okay, maybe it's better to give him a few more days of rest and recovery and training to then be ready for the tougher tests that are to come in the knockout stages.
Talk to us, as mentioned, look, there's multiple ways that the United States could go ahead and win this group. It was a little bit more favorable than some other groups. But what would it mean for the team, but just also for fans, to see this team doing well and off to a good start in this tournament and with hopes of continuing to advance?
Oh, hugely. And I think that is such a huge factor in this World Cup for the host nations. We've seen it impact Canada in their performance yesterday, Mexico with their 2 wins so far, and clearly the US. These co-host nations are being spurred on by the wonderful atmosphere inside the stadium and sort of the goodwill from football fans all over the country. And I do think that if they can just get through into the knockout stages, win the group, continue this great momentum that they've built up over the 2 games so far. Remember, the US has never scored 6 goals in the first 2 games of a World Cup. This is the most number of goals that they've scored. So this, by any measure, is their best start to World Cup ever. And to do it in front of your home fans must feel even more special for these players. We saw how they celebrated the first goal. And it's just been a brilliant atmosphere so far. It's been lovely for me as well to be able to watch and cover it from the sidelines. And I think that they just really need to use that crowd advantage. It is the 12th man. I know it's a cliche, but I think that could potentially help the US in games later on in the tournament when it starts to get more difficult in the round of 16. And as you pull further than that, they're going to have to be on their A game. The players are doing it. And if they've got the crowd driving them on too, that's going to be an extra factor.
Every single host city has been absolutely phenomenal to watch. It's my favorite thing. I had friends who took off today to watch the game. Thankfully, we work in sports. We're able to watch it for a living. Adam, we appreciate your time as you continue to cover the World Cup. Taking a look at the Group D table, the United States winning today versus Australia. Again, they could potentially win tonight if Paraguay finishes with a win or a draw.